Have you made the switch to Knix? Millions of women have made the switch to the revolutionary period underwear from Knix. That's Knix. Period panties from Knix are like no other, making them the #1 leak-proof underwear brand in North America. They're comfy, stylish, and absorbent, perfect for period protection from your lightest to your heaviest days. They look, feel, and machine wash just like regular underwear, but feature incognito protection that has you covered. You can shop sizes from extra small to 4XL. Choose from all kinds of colors, prints, and different styles, from bikinis to boy shorts, thongs to high-rise. You've got to try Knix. See why millions are ditching disposable, wasteful period products and have switched to Knix. Go to knix.com and get 15% off with promo code TRY15. That's knix.com, promo code TRY15 for 15% off life-changing period underwear. That's knix.com.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Streamed and Screened, an entertainment podcast about movies and TV from Lee Enterprises. I'm Terry Lipshetz, managing editor of the National Newsroom at Lee and co-host of the program, and Bruce Miller, editor of the Sioux City Journal and a longtime entertainment reporter. Such a long-time entertainment reporter. We're going to go back to the 80s, back to young Bruce, younger
Bruce. This is the archival Bruce. This is the one where you get in and go, did I write that story? I can't believe I wrote that story.
Yeah.
But we're going back to 1985. 1985 was when the Brat Pack was born. And if you don't know anything about this, there was the Rat Pack back in the 50s and 60s with Frank and Dean and Sammy, those people. Well, in the 80s, there were a lot of teen movies, not because Hollywood wanted to make teen movies, but they were successful. And kids would come back and go to the film more than once. So repeat viewing was key to all of this. Well, they had a movie coming out in 85 called St. Elmo's Fire that was largely cast with 20-something actors. And when one was going to be interviewed, Emilio was going to be interviewed by New York Magazine. He said, would you like to go with us? We're going out tonight. And he took the writer with him on some night out at bars and whatever. And it was Judd Nelson and Rob Lowe that went with. And he thought, well, I'm going to shift the focus of this story into something a little different. And, great headline writing can make a great story and can be a volume thing in any business. But he labeled it the Brat Pack. And that stuck. It stung. And today we look back and we realize that probably wasn't a good characterization of those people, but it is for better or worse, a title that stuck. And Andrew McCarthy, one of the ones in that movie, has since gone back and talked to all of the actors in that Brat Pack, and it's Brat Pack and Brat Pack adjacent, based on what films they were in, and asked them what they thought about this and what it meant to them and how it either hindered or helped their careers. It's coming out on Hulu. It's called Brats. It's next week, and it's a documentary that looks at, what was that phenomenon? What was that all about? But it got me to dig back into that time because I was on the junket for St. Elmo's Fire, and I did interview all of those actors, and the one they always kind of excluded from the Brat Pack was Mare Winningham. She was kind of older than the rest of the ones. Yep. She had a family, and she had a little more street cred than these. So whenever they did that, she would be, and Mare was with us too, but we don't consider her part of this. But to a person, they all hated it at the time because it was labeling them, and they didn't want to be defined by whatever a character might have been. They wanted to do much, much more. In fact, Emilio Estevez and Rob Lowe were best friends growing up. And they would make little films in their backyard using their brothers, Chad Lowe and Charlie Sheen, and they would do their versions of The Godfather or whatever Western might be big, and then shoot them because they were going to be these huge directors in later life. Well, they got in because, and here's your current reference, Nepo Baby.
Right.
Martin Sheen is Emilio Estevez's dad, and he could easily have his kids seen for auditions for a number of films. And so as a result, they were both cast in The Outsiders a few years earlier, and that was a huge thing based on an S.E. Hinton book that was, massive with a young audience. So they had a kind of a foundation, but then St. Elmo's Fire came, plunked a whole bunch of them together, and for better or worse, they had this moniker.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, where you really get that connection too is because in '85, and I believe it came out a little bit before St. Elmo's Fire, was The Breakfast Club, and The Breakfast Club was very much, it was similar. Like Breakfast Club was more of here's the high school kind of coming of age story. St. Elmo's Fire is the we're just graduated from college coming of age story. But you had the crossovers where you had Emilio Estevez, you had Judd Nelson, and you had Ali Sheedy appearing in both. So you had that added connection of like, you know, you had two movies that kind of blew up and attracted young people, but it also had significant crossover just between those two films.
Yeah, well, and really, if you're going to use that label for youth films, John Hughes owns it. He's the one who really fostered that. Joel Schumacher directed St. Elmo's Fire, and Joel came from a costuming background, and he was interested in how they looked. And so he gave them all a very specific look in terms of this character would wear this. They had no clue. They were not like picking the clothes, and they were not necessarily thinking that they were this part. In fact, Rob Lowe thought he should play the part that Judd Nelson was getting, and vice versa. And it went back and forth. And so fascinating to hear them talk about it right after the heat of the article came out, and then how they have since dealt with it in the ensuing years. What did this mean for them? And, you know, interestingly enough, when Andrew was trying to do this miniseries of this documentary, he had a problem getting to certain people. He thought he could just call them up and say, do you want to talk about those Brat Pack years and what that meant? And Molly Ringwald said, no. I don't want to have anything to do with that. I've moved on, and I don't, you know, I respect you for doing this, but I am not that person anymore, and I don't want to have that be my definition. Same with Judd Nelson. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now, Rob Lowe, he was leaning in like crazy, and he said, yes, I'll talk. I'd like to talk about that time, because he also then had a huge kind of scandal that attached to him. And how this man has reinvented himself time and time again is like unbelievable. He is a true survivor in Hollywood. And then there were ones that you think, well, can we include them? Anthony Michael Hall, who was in The Breakfast Club and Vacation Movies. He's had his own career path, but now you see him largely as villains. I think the last time I saw him was in a Halloween film as kind of this gruff leader of the community. You think that was not at all the little nerdy boy that he played in these films. So they do have a kind of cycle to all of their lifestyles.
Yeah. It's interesting, you know, you kind of go through, you know, first off, like, who are the Brat Pack actors? So the general consensus is it's Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Rob Lowe, Andrew McCarthy, Demi Moore, Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald, and Ali Sheedy. And then you kind of have these adjacent actors like Matt Dillon, Patrick Swayze, Tom Cruise, C. Thomas Howell, Ralph Macchio, John Cusack, Joan Cusack, I think even pops into some list. Jon Cryer, who of course was with, you know, he made a comeback with, but he also with Charlie Sheen eventually had a very successful career. And there's some other, you know, actors that kind of like would appear, you know, in that kind of grouping also. But it's fascinating when you look at the list of movies that kind of get associated with the Brat Pack. First off, other than those two, The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire, it's not like you get 4 or 5 of them in any given movie. It was like 1 or 2 would kind of be in a movie together, and then you might get one of those adjacent. So, you know, for instance, if you look at like 16 Candles, Anthony Michael Hall's in it, Molly Ringwald's in it, but then you also have, you know, like John Cusack is in it. You look at Pretty in Pink, and who's in that one? Andrew McCarthy and Molly Ringwald with Jon Cryer and James Spader.
Spader.
Right. So it's a lot of these movies where you'll get actors in there, but they're not necessarily, it's not like, you know, you look at the Rat Pack, and those that were in the Rat Pack were kind of like always seen together. There was a huge stretch of the 1960s basically where you would get Sinatra and Sammy Davis.
Ocean's 11.
Right, exactly. I mean, I mean, it's more if you look at things like, what Clooney and some of those when they did the remake of Ocean's 11, some of those actors probably do more together now than the Brat Pack did back in the 80s together.
The secret is the age.
Right.
I don't think we have actors that are of a certain age that are working that regularly. You see Timothée Chalamet, he gets a lot of work. You see Zendaya, she gets work.
Yep.
Okay, and then where do we go from there? Austin Butler, maybe?
Yeah.
But it isn't like it used to be. And that's what made this period so prolific.
Yep.
Is that they were in a lot of movies during a very intense period of time, maybe 10 years at best.
Right, yeah.
And the mastermind of all of it is John Hughes.
Exactly.
John Hughes he wrote movies for kids. He wrote about kids. He knew what they were about. And that's what fostered all of it. It wasn't somebody else. If you didn't have a John Hughes, you would not have had this group of kids at all.
Exactly. And that's, I think, the main point is really, in a lot of ways, St. Elmo's Fire is an outlier. Although, if you look at, like, how did the casting come, Schumacher actually talked to John Hughes and got 3 actors from The Breakfast Club into his film. So, but you look at that era, it was all John Hughes. It was 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, Some Kind of Wonderful, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Those were aimed at kind of like, the teen angst, coming of age. And then he kind of adulted up a little bit when he started doing movies like She's Having a Baby and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and then eventually like The Great Outdoors, where John Hughes kind of skipped the college years. He went from high school to adulting, but he did kind of move into that adult world almost seamlessly, and just kind of brought some of those actors with him along the way.
It's interesting. Joel Schumacher really had an idea of each of the characters in mind and kind of wanted them to be that. So he started with the dressing of how they looked, what kind of clothes they wear. Clothes were his big thing. And he would then say, well, you would probably act this way. That was the kind of director he was. Whereas John Hughes pulled back and let them bring their personality out. It's very fascinating, having interviewed both of those guys, how much different they were. Joel was very, I don't want to say flamboyant because that's not the correct word, but he was very insistent about the kinds of things he wanted from his films, whereas John Hughes was his story he was true to, but if they could bring something else of themselves out, he was all for it. And I don't think he told them what he wanted them to do. I think he just cast well and found young actors who were good at kind of meeting that idea of what it was.
That era of movies, too, is interesting for me because if you look at the actors, first off, like Judd Nelson and then you mentioned, of course, Mare Winningham. They're both about the same age. They're both born in 1959, but the bulk of the Brat Pack members were largely born in the early 1960s, like 62, 64. You had a couple of younger ones like Anthony Michael Hall and Molly Ringwald, who I think were born in 68. But that main component of that era of Brat Pack actors, they're largely like young baby boomers. So it's almost playing to a slightly different era for me because I was born in 75. So a lot of those themes that these actors are going through are still a little bit older for me. Like I was, when like these Brat Pack movies were coming out, I was 9 years old, 10. So some of them weren't really age appropriate for me at the time. Some were. So some of them I've actually come back to watch much later on in life because I kind of missed them when they first came out and they weren't really meant for me. Like to me, my age is more of like the Coreys, like Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, looking at movies like, License to Drive and maybe even like A Stand By Me, that kind of coming of age. That kind of ages up a little bit more into my era.
Macaulay Culkin.
Yeah, you kind of get into those a little bit. So it's kind of interesting. But for me to go back and I've rewatched so many of these movies now. Some of them I never really saw in the first time, and some of them it's been a really long time since I saw. And it's interesting watching St. Elmo's Fire again. You think about the time of the 80s, and it's kind of a cheesy movie when you watch it now.
Yeah.
Some of these movies I don't think they they stand the test of time? Like, are any of these movies in your mind, like, it doesn't matter to me? Like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, it worked in 85, 86 when it came out, and it still works today. But when I watch something like St. Elmo's Fire, it just doesn't feel like it still works. Like it reflects too much of like the Reagan mid 80s kind of times, and and yuppies and things like that.
I think Breakfast Club still holds up.
Okay.
I think that one still has a viability because you all go through that kind of high school age. There's usually somebody who fits one of those types. And even though it's different and there are other, you still hate the same people and you still why some are doing. But I think that one holds up. You're definitely right with Ferris Bueller. I think you can watch that anytime and you're not really sure when it was, but you know it was in the past.
Right.
McDonald's presents Burger Reviews by Hamburglar. Today's review, the hotter, juicier classic burgers. Mr. Hamburglar. Robble, robble. He said, of all the McDonald's burgers I've ever hamburgled, these are the hottest, juiciest, and tastiest. Brubble.
Hamburglary is on the rise. Get caught with a medium double cheeseburger meal for $6. Price and participation may vary. Promotion pricing may be lower than meal price. Comparison to prior classic burgers.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Again, in my deep dive of my own archives, I looked back for Anthony Michael Hall. And he and Robert Downey Jr. joined Saturday Night Live at a very early age after this kind of period. Very full of themselves, both of them. I remember this vividly. We had a Saturday Night Live party, and they were really insistent that, no, they weren't just doing television. They weren't lowering themselves to that this was just something they were trying because they wanted to see it. And we kind of like this show, but we're still going to do movies, and we may be off this in 6 weeks, and then we'll do a movie. And don't think that we're committing to anything. And I thought, wow, that's pretty bold coming from somebody that young. But, they didn't last long on Saturday Night Live. And I don't think you look back on those great years that they were members of that cast. But they did have an attitude, and that's something that I think is different about some of these people. I mentioned earlier Macaulay Culkin. Macaulay Culkin was always a very press-friendly actor. He was playful, fun. Those Home Alone years were really cool, and he had a very successful career. And then he just backed away. And I don't know that he's really all that user-friendly now, but he was not one who kind of wanted to be above whatever he was cast in. All those films that he did with John Hughes, he embraces now and thinks they're wonderful. And he's got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So he must have done something right. Some of these other ones, I can't tell you what they've last done,
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know what he's up to.
Yeah, I mean, most of these, I tried to skim through their filmographies and stuff. They've all kind of done something, but really, other than Rob Lowe and Demi Moore, most of them have kind of had these like weird, and even with Rob Lowe, he had that, he had the scandal, the sex scandal.
Right.
And it kind of knocked him out for a while, but he came back, and he came back strong, and he's out there, and Demi Moore has always been out there. I mean, she's not stopped working. But you look at the others, like Emilio Estevez, he had his Mighty Ducks, he had his Young Guns, but he kind of faded after that. And where's Anthony Michael Hall really been? He's, as he said, he kind of pops up here and there in a villainous way. They just kind of come and go. I don't remember the last time I saw Molly Ringwald.
Well, yes, you do, because she was in Feud, the Capote versus the Swans.
Okay.
And Demi was in that as well. And it's interesting how nobody made the connection. These two were Brat Packers at one point.
So that's a connection. There you go. They're back.
And they're now in Feud.
Yeah. Ali Sheedy is I haven't, did
Ali Sheedy has done things, but she does a lot of like Lifetime movies.
Yeah.
And I've interviewed her recently, and I can't remember what it was for. But it's amazing, and I think this will be a great documentary that will get to see what did happen with them and what did they think about themselves at the time. I think if you were going a time machine back, and I was sitting there, I probably thought that they were full of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having been around their age or whatever, I probably would have been impressed. Remember, Demi, we always talked about her voice. She had a very raspy voice.
She did, yeah.
That was the thing that, and gorgeous. Right. I think she would have been, if you did it kind of a reference, would have been like a Jennifer Aniston of the time. And, you look back, they called this the Little Chill, too, because the Big Chill had come out in 82, 83, somewhere around there. And that was another group of friends. So we hadn't had Friends, the TV series, until much, much later. But this was a junior version of The Big Chill. And so you can kind of match up those characters as to who fit with which one. And sure enough, I think it tells us we have types, in our own day and age. I think we could put a name to each of these people in our lives. Who is the Rob Lowe in our life? Who would be that kind of character? And he's kind of, in this show, he's irresponsible, and he wants to play saxophone, but he has family obligations. And it's like, I think I know somebody like that.
It's really fascinating, too, when you think at where movies have gone. I mean, I can think back to the 1980s, whether I saw the movies at the time or not. I still remember all of these movies being hits at the time, being talked about at the time. As I said, even if I didn't see them, like I had friends who had older siblings who would see them, and maybe that's why I saw Weird Science when I did, or something like that. But today, like, you don't have these types of movies anymore. I mean, you have it seems like it morphed into the Disney Channel with those kind of tween shows, like that had a Zendaya or another one of those types of actors.
Miley.
And they appealed to a certain, but it's not the same. Like, they don't have that same type of cultural impact that these films did for the 1980s.
And it talks to the whole thing about watching it on TV versus seeing it in a film.
Right.
They did not release these things on, back in the day, VHS tapes until at least 6 months or a year after they were in the theaters. So if you wanted to be part of that discussion at your school or, among your friends, you had to go see it again in theaters. And now you can stream them.
Yeah. Do you ever wonder? No, I mean, it's not like John Hughes died. He died young, but it wasn't like he was 35. Young. Yeah, he died too young. He was 59 when he died. He had largely gotten out of directing by the time he died, but he was still producing films. But do you ever wonder what his career arc would have been if he was given an opportunity to direct into his 70s or continue producing films?
I think he would have reunited with some of these kids.
I know.
He would have done something with them that maybe they would think was an honorable film. I mean, one that they really would be glad. And I think they would, to a person, go back to say, yeah, we'll work with you, because his stuff was good.
Yeah.
And it all was because he was a great writer. That's the key. Those vacation movies, he wrote those. So when you watch that 25 times on television at Christmas or whenever, it's because his writing was so solid, you could get a laugh out of it, even if you've seen the scene 20 or 30 times.
Yeah. I think the connection too with John Hughes is when he started doing these films, he was still relatively young. So the actors he was working with, maybe they were 16 or 17 or 18 or 20, but he was only 30. So he wasn't drastically older. So they were able, it wasn't your father talking down to you. It was more of like an older sibling who you can kind of connect with. So I think that was helpful. He also worked a real job. He wasn't like a lifetime Hollywood guy. He worked at an ad agency in Chicago. I mean, that's why when you watch a movie like She's Having a Baby, he based it loosely on his own life and his own career. So I always wonder, like, given that opportunity, he did the teenage stuff, the high school stuff. Then he came back and he did kind of the more adulting type of things, like She's Having a Baby and The Great Outdoors and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. What would have happened if he got a chance to maybe, after he decided he had stepped away from directing for so long, right? But maybe he decides at age 65, 70, I'm going to direct one more film, and I'm going to bring back, a Judd Nelson or an Emilio Estevez or one of those characters and just do an adult film of like, here's somebody who's now in their 60s and they've got maybe grown kids and they've got to deal with the grandkids, or they're dealing with retirement, or they're dealing with late. I think he still would have told a marvelous story, and it would have had a killer soundtrack on top of it.
Right. Do you think he would have done something like Mank, where you have old Hollywood, where he would cast all those people in those roles? I don't know.
I don't know.
Would he go away from his, and would he be Scorsese level?
I think so. It was kind of like John Candy made a lot of appearances in John Hughes movies. So I think he would have had certain, kind of like Scorsese, maybe he would have, if he kept moving, he would have brought in younger actors over time. But I think he would have had that moment where he comes back and brings, like, I'm going to have older Matthew Broderick, but I'm also going to have like Macaulay Culkin back again, and then I'm going to also have this somebody who maybe we like a Timothy Chalamet, for instance, somebody who's wouldn't have worked with him at the time but is kind of breaking through now.
I think he could have done like Spielberg's The Fabelmans, where he would look back at his own life and then cast it with people that he'd been working with all those years. I think that would have been a fascinating film. But I really think we miss him.
Yeah.
Even though we haven't seen a film that was a John Hughes production in decades, right. I still think that's a missing segment in the lineup of what kind of shows we do get.
Yeah. He had such a short career as a director. He kept writing. I mean, he kept writing for a long time, but you look at his directing, he did 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, Ferris Bueller, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, She's Having a Baby, and Uncle Buck in a very short 10-year window. And then the next thing he did was, after Uncle Buck, he didn't direct a movie again until 1991, Curly Sue, and that was the last film he directed. The rest of it was writing and producing. He didn't direct Home Alone. He oversaw it. He was very much connected to it. And if you've seen any documentaries on the making, he made his appearances when needed, like when John Candy showed up on set for the one day. That was like the one day John Hughes shows up is when John Candy's there. But though he was very, I think he wanted to make sure it turned out the way he remembered it or wanted it to be. And so it wasn't like he was insistent on anything, but he knew exactly what his vision was. Yep. And if there wasn't another director, Chris Columbus would be a good example of somebody who got his vision. Right.
But what would he do a Harry Potter? Would he have been a good Harry Potter director? It might have been a whole different thing.
Who knows? Yeah. I would like to think that John Hughes would have kind of come out of directing retirement and he would have done something it's just kind of like, this is it. This is going to be my last thing I'm going to direct. Maybe I'll keep writing. Maybe I'll keep producing, but I'm going to come back and do this one more coming of age type of story, but to kind of connect the dots between Breakfast Club, She's Having a Baby, and then whatever,
Yeah.
I'm planning a retirement. I don't know what you would have called it.
I think it would be, maybe one of these people should do a story about him.
Yeah.
Maybe he's the untold documentary that Andrew McCarthy is missing in this. It's too me-centric and not who is the architect of this whole thing.
Well, I do love a good documentary, so I'm really looking forward.
I think you'll like it. Yeah, I've seen parts of it, and I do think it's fascinating to hear them expound about these things. He said, you'd think that we would talk with each other all the time. We didn't. And some of these people he hadn't seen since they had done the movie.
Sure.
And then it was just a matter of calling him up. He said he had no agenda. He did not have certain questions he was going to ask him. He just wanted a conversation. And he said, I was always a rival with Rob Lowe. We would always be up for the same parts. And I always kind of didn't like him, And then when he met him now, he said it was like old, we were friends. And Rob, as much as you get an impression of who he is, he's like George Hamilton back in the day, where you thought you knew who that actor was. Mm-hmm. Rob Lowe is a survivor, number one. And number two, very good at reinventing himself. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Rob can't hear in one of his ears.
Oh, really? Wow.
And you stand with him and he says, look, I can't, get over to this side. And then you go over and then ask the questions in that ear and he hears you. Did you ever know that's like a thing? No, because he's very good at controlling his image.
Yeah.
And his wife, Cheryl, handles all of his look. So she used to be a makeup artist, and she has her own company now. And that, those things kind of enter in. But he's richer than Midas, and he's got working in the business with him. And, as soon as you think he's done with his show, he goes on to something else. And now he's got a game show. So there you are.
Yeah. I saw the trailer. It looks fun, and it's kind of neat to see these actors again. And I thought also Emilio Estevez, it looks like he has a very nice kitchen.
Well, imagine though, if you're coming in and we're just going to spitball here for 15, 20 minutes or an hour or two. And then what happens from that? But at one point they were close. They were all going out and doing things, but times have changed. So it'll be a fun way of learning what happened and what could happen.
Yeah. Do you ever wonder, if they all text each other, do they have kind of, that group chat where you can link?
That you hate?
You're right. Exactly. You put your family member on it, and you give it a name. It would be hilarious if they had, like a group text chat, and it was actually called Brat Pack.
And wouldn't it be good that you could go in there and thwart it a little?
Right.
You go, Nelson, you can't act. Don't be acting like that. And then you go, who said this? Who was this? What was this?
Yep.
Agree, and that's smiley face emoji. But at different times, different people. I wonder if some of them even are on social media. I bet they aren't all even connected.
Sure. No, I agree. All right. So the homework assignment for all of these, because we're talking about school stuff.
We are.
That was the era. We're doing coming of age school movies. So your homework assignment is you got to listen to our previous episode of Streamed and Scream, where we talked about John Hughes and the music of John Hughes. So that's assignment number 1. Go back and watch The Breakfast Club. Go back and watch St. Elmo's Fire. And then the final assignment, June 13th, watch Brats on Hulu. So there you go. 4 assignments. Previous podcast episode, Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire, Brats documentary. And that's it. And then,
And recheck your work. And then also, if you don't hand it in, you will be on detention.
That's right. You'll get that villainous principal is going to come after you and try to get you. But that person will be nabbed at the end. It'll be the tables will be turned on the principal.
We'll be good.
Yep.
But
all good.
And give us a buzz. Let us know what you think about all those films, because it is fascinating, and it is a very specific period in time that maybe you weren't a part of at all. But it is a way of looking back when Hollywood was really ruled by young people.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, on that note, we'll wrap, and we'll be back again next week with another episode of Streamed and Screened.
Can I really do this? It's what everyone asks at every new stage of life. Sandy Spring Bank has you covered with personalized solutions to buy a house or improve the one you've got, or to grow your business, because that helps our community grow. We'll show you how to save more for the future, wherever it brings you. What's your next financial destination? Sandy Spring Bank. Visit sandyspringbank.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 406382.
Ah, the sizzle of McDonald's sausage. It's enough to make you crave your favorite breakfasts. Enough to head over to McDonald's. Enough to make you really wish this commercial were scratch and sniff.
And if you're a sausage person, now get 2 satisfyingly savory sausage McGriddles, sausage biscuits, or sausage burritos for just $3.33. Or mix and match. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal. Single item at regular price.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Have you made the switch to Knix? Millions of women have made the switch to the revolutionary period underwear from Knix. That's Knix. Period panties from Knix are like no other, making them the #1 leak-proof underwear brand in North America. They're comfy, stylish, and absorbent, perfect for period protection from your lightest to your heaviest days. They look, feel, and machine wash just like regular underwear, but feature incognito protection that has you covered. You can shop sizes from extra small to 4XL. Choose from all kinds of colors, prints, and different styles, from bikinis to boy shorts, thongs to high-rise. You've got to try Knix. See why millions are ditching disposable, wasteful period products and have switched to Knix. Go to knix.com and get 15% off with promo code TRY15. That's Knix.com, promo code TRY15 for 15% off life-changing period underwear. That's KNIX.com.